You're listening to Product-Led Revenue, brought to you by Correlated. In each episode, you'll hear first-hand advice and tactics from SaaS, sales, and revenue leaders about using product signals to drive expansion and revenue growth. Let's jump in.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Product-Led Revenue. I'm Breezy Beaumont, and this episode is brought to you by Correlated, a product-led revenue platform for B2B software companies that focus on product-led growth. Today, our guest is Aron. He is the Director of Sales at Monday.com. Aron, thanks for joining me today.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for the invite.
All right, so to give our audience some background on yourself, can you tell us about your role at Monday?
Yeah, absolutely. So today I'm the Director of Sales at Monday, which pretty much means that I manage 5 different teams, which is a variety of account executives and account managers. And very quickly going back into the history, I was the first salesperson in Monday.com, built our sales team in Israel, and then moved to the US for 2 years to open up the office there and build the sales team there. And then after that, moved back to our headquarters in Israel, which is where I'm right now managing 5 teams and 5 managers.
Awesome. So tell me about the company in the early days. Like, was it always product led? Was there sales involvement? Tell me about how that mix got started in the beginning.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say yes, it was always product led. Even more, it was only product led in the beginning. So when I started the company was in 2016. I was the 16th employee, so it was really small still at the time, small CS team, R&D. At the time, the CEO and the CTO, today the co-CEO. So really, really small team. And really the kind of foundations that at the time that was now Monday.com, that was the name before we had the name switch, was built on is marketing, customer success, and the product. So an interesting detail is that we actually had 10,000 customers that we were working with before we even had the sales team. So really logical question that can come up from there is like, so why even have a sales team if you're doing so well without a sales team? And I think that's part that we can speak about more here as well. But especially if you do that product-led growth, there's a very good synergy between a product-led growth approach and a sales team. And what you often see is that we're kind of focusing on the fears that often the 2 different sides of the party kind of imagine. But if you start looking at how can you actually build with a sales team on top of that product-led growth, it comes with an amazing synergy that really allows one to consistently improve the product, which is obviously really important with product-led growth. But it also allows you as a sales team to start at a much better starting point by leveraging that product-led growth starting point. So that might be something that's interesting to dive a little bit deeper into as well.
Yeah. I'd be curious to hear who was on the team when you were talking about joining and even just like a quick, like how you got introduced. Because I have to imagine you had to, help them overcome some mental hurdles thinking about, we are doing really well. And they were obviously open and thinking about the idea of hiring someone into sales, but it's still definitely a little bit of a swap internally. So tell me about that.
No, absolutely. Well, it's actually an interesting story because I skipped a little bit, small part before I joined the Pulse, which is Monday.com today, which is I came from a sales background, but I actually made a conscious decision of want to try to do something different. And a big part that was related to was that I worked in a few organizations where it was what we kind of call that Wolf of Wall Street, unethical, or at least at the very minimum, a not very pleasant environment to be in regards to collaboration with colleagues. And I started kind of connecting that to sales. I was like, well, sales is a job where you always need to fight with your colleagues and people are trying to, kind of screw each other over and to get your commission models and things like that. So I made the conscious decision to look for something different. And obviously the Pulse Monday.com now wasn't hiring for salespeople because they didn't want to have salespeople. So when I came into the organization, I actually came into, I would say it's kind of a mix between a CS and a sales position, considering they didn't have a sales team and obviously somebody's handling those customers that are coming in. But then it was a really transactional kind of, I call it letting buy instead of selling, which connects to, hey, I need 20 users. Oh, great. Let me show you how you can pay for those 20 users, right? It's more letting buy than really doing sales. So that's what I came into the company for. Then I really quickly understood that I was really missing sales. And because it was kind of that mix where you do customer success and sales combined, also my natural tendency was to start working with customers to see where's the growth, how can we get more out of it, and really finding back that passion that I always had in sales. So it started really more with me realizing I missed this and starting to think about, okay, how can I get back into this? So from there on, it kind of went to career kind of building a role that doesn't really exist in the company. So where it started was me just coming into the company, kind of saying, you know what, why not try it? Trying to do it to the best possible way that I can, meaning not stepping over anybody, really having everybody that is there to support you involved in the process. So the first step is I spoke to my manager at the time, Idan, absolute great guy, that was at the time the head of the customer success team. Idan Hershko is his name. And he taught me a lot, but also supported me a lot in going to the right direction. So the moment that I had that conversation with him and said, listen, I see a huge potential in sales. I also miss it. I think there's so much more that we can do around it. He really quickly supported it and was like, you know what, let's go together to upper management, or in this case, the CEO and the CTO, and kind of have that conversation with him. Let's pitch it. And because I had that conversation before with my manager, it allowed me to come to that meeting already knowing what do they care about, which kind of going back to, if you're trying to kind of build a role for yourself, or really if you're trying to do anything that you need to get approval from anybody in the organization, the first thing that you want to try to understand is, what are their considerations? So by having that conversation already with my manager at the time, going into that meeting, I already knew they kind of have that Wolf of Wall Street image. You know, it's going to ruin the product because that one big customer is going to tell what the company needs to do, ruin it for everybody else. It's going to be unethical, all those type of things. So based on that, I already realized actually their concern and what got me back into I want to be back in sales is very much aligned. Because my focus is very much around value-based selling, really more helping the customer to be successful and throughout that process grow together, which also in the end means you're growing accounts, which connects to the bottom line, ARR, which we are measured on, the recurring ARR. So I really came in there not expecting anything, right? I joined the company. I think I was in the company 5-6 months at the time. Yes, I had background in sales, but no fancy leadership. So really what I was expecting is I come there, I do my pitch. They say, listen, Aaron, you're a nice guy, but no. That actually didn't happen, which is also something that really became a big part of my managerial style by seeing those type of examples. So pretty much what they did is, I think, really smart. They didn't take a big risk, but they did allow me to prove it. So pretty much what they said is, you know what, take the next 3 months, and in those 3 months, spend 50% time on CS, 50% time on sales, show us what you can do. So it was very small risk for them. It was not like start hiring and do everything immediately. But it was also immediately for me, wow, like they actually give me this opportunity, which motivated me to a whole new level. And then in those 3 months, I was able to bring more revenue in than the whole customer success team combined. But probably even more important, I was able to close our biggest account, the biggest account that we had inside of the organization at the time. And I think what that really proved is, one, yes, there is a lot of potential in here because that was clear from the revenue. But two, the reason why we need a sales team is to be able to bring companies on board instead of teams. And I think the big thing that I really presented in those 3 months is, if you want to close organization, it comes with a lot of things that you need a salesperson for, not because it is around only the negotiation or things like that, but it's to run through the process of security, right? Who needs to be involved, like legal, being able to handle in which server they need to be, or going to an RFP, or there's so many different processes that really require somebody involved in it to lead that to success. Also, early on, having a voice that's kind of focusing on how can you get most value out of the platform, which in the end, the more people use it, the more value you get out of it, also allows us to land much bigger opportunities much earlier on. I think when that model was proved, when they saw, hey, the revenue comes in, plus it allows us to actually significantly close much larger organizations, they said, you know what? You're the first for the salesperson, start hiring other people. So that is really where it started. And I would say the biggest thing from an individual contributor perspective that I would recommend to any of the individual contributors is be ballsy. You know, don't be afraid to speak towards what you want to get to, but do it in a way where it's really clear that your goals and what you're aiming for is very much aligned to the need of the company. So first ask yourself, is this role really making an impact? Is it something that we need? Then ask yourself, is this aligned to the needs and the interest of whoever I need to convince? And then have that conversation where it actually is really clear our interests are aligned, which makes the process so much easier. On the recommendation of like a leadership level, I can say the impact that it had, that the CTO at the time, now the co-CEO, and also the CEO, of course, came to me and actually gave me this opportunity, there is no other way that somebody could have installed such a passion, such a connection to the company, such an understanding that I'm lucky, which really led to the willingness to work really hard, to do those extra hours, to, not wanting to fail and making sure that I do everything in my power to succeed. You'll be surprised how far that goes. And that's also something that really became a big part of my leadership style right now. Believe in your people. And I think that kind of directly leads in the next topic. The CTO at the time, now the co-CEO, also ended up becoming my first manager, knowing that he did not have experience on sales. Also very transparent around it. The first thing that he told me is, I'm here, to support where you need, but that sales much better than I do. So that's not something that I can really help you with. He ended up being probably the best manager that I ever had, and 100% sure the best manager in regards to how to manage people, how to make sure to keep that motivation, how to get them through the rougher times by, being open and transparent and really supporting them and believing in them. And that just turned into a really big aspect of how I work, and also led to a scenario that I said every single leader, manager, however you want to call it, just as I don't think it's the same thing, right? The leader is what you should be, and manager is just the role that somebody subscribed to you. A manager means like officially, according to the title that you have, people should listen or things like that. When I speak about the leader, I don't really connect it to individual contributor, manager, director, VP, or any other level. It is somebody that people want to learn from, somebody that people are inspired by, somebody that leads by example. That's when I say leader, what I mean. So for me, that also immediately made a really clear kind of mental note. Any person that I ever going to work with, find one thing that they're really strong at and learn as much as you can from that. And that also allowed me throughout the amount of time to really learn a lot from everybody around me, including every different manager that I had, and also all of the team members, which you also consistently continue to learn from.
Yeah, when you started to think about like how you would grow out that team, obviously there were lessons that you took for yourself as a manager, as a leader, that you were able to kind of bring into how you'd want to grow that team. But as you started to think about, okay, this is the next hire that we need on the team, was it as simple as saying, okay, we needed an AE on the team? Or how did you think about expanding, and kind of like what were the skill sets that you looked at for folks who you wanted to have join the team?
Yeah, great question. And that also really changed over time, because obviously the company very significantly changed. So the moment that I started building the team, we were still called The Pulse. We weren't Monday.com. We weren't a famous brand. We didn't have the revenues and everything that we have now, that we can hire a lot more on experience. At the time, we only had the ability to hire on potential, because experience then was too expensive. So it was a really, really different timing as well. I was in the lucky position that I was able to do it twice in two different countries. So I could take everything that I learned from the first time and immediately apply it the second time. So that was something that really helped. In the beginning, I think one of the big aspects was it wasn't like we had tons of people waiting, right? It was a still unknown organization. We were at a very early stage of the company. So it was really more around who are candidates that I think can have a lot of potential. We didn't have budgets there that we could hire somebody with 3 to 5 years of experience. It was mainly people that either came from other jobs or people that came fresh out of university. So what I really looked at, is this somebody that can have potential? Is this somebody that like we can grow to be tomorrow's leader? Things that I looked at to really focus on it is, one, our platform is extremely customizable, which means that I need people that are very creative. They need to be creative in the way that they build solutions on the product. They need to be creative in the way that they work with our customers to find workarounds. If there is a, let's say, for example, financial issue, I want people that work close enough with the customer to understand, is the cash flow issue, is the overall budget issue, like what are the different ways that we can work around it by being creative. So looking at somebody that's willing to grind, like somebody that works hard, looking at somebody that's creative, of course, looking at somebody that has client-facing capabilities, meaning you know how to work with people, you're somebody that gives a pleasant vibe, you have a good appearance, not physically, but with the way that you communicate. So those are things that are really important. I think one of the big things, and I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I think it also really depends on the type of organization and the complexity of the product, because if it's a really complex product, that wouldn't be an opportunity to do at all. But one of the things that we do with every interviewee, we actually ask them to demo our platform to us. And what that creates is you immediately kind of eliminate people that worked in a role for 10 years and kind of as a robot can say everything that is related to that specific position. where I'm actually more measuring on how quick can somebody learn, especially when you hire for potential, how quick can they turn around? And it says to me a lot more when I see how far somebody got in 3 days to actually know our product. Of course, be realistic. Don't expect somebody that had 3 days to learn your product to be the similar level as a sales engineer. But that really allowed me to see how do they handle things that they didn't expect. Another thing that I recommend in interviews is, again, depending if it's somebody with experience, it's a lot easier to do that. If it's somebody new, it's a bit trickier because they don't really have that experience to move back to. But don't ask what if questions, ask what did you do? What if questions is really easy to kind of build a great story around that you think the person on the other side wants to hear. What did you actually do in a specific account with a specific lead makes it much more difficult to just make a fancy story around it, which in general means you're going to learn a lot more about how does the person think, where did they come from, where is that strategy connected to. So that's all a little bit more on the early phases, was really kind of who could be people that I believed could be good in this role, which is kind of a mix between a customer success and a sales profile, because we work so hand in hand with our customers, and regardless whether you're on the sales or the customer success side, we still help them with building out workflows before. Not every account, for example, has a customer success agent involved in it. So we need to be able to actually do a big part of that work as well. So that's how it really started. If you're looking now, is yes, I think it's really important, and especially when you have the luxury to pick a little bit more, is to find hires that strengthen the overall team. So my goal is not to have a team of 10 people that all have the same skill, even the opposite, right? Because one of the big focuses here at Monday.com is how can we grow and strengthen the team as a whole? We're trying to stay away from just individual and connecting the way that we reward people, connecting the way that we communicate, connecting the way that we allow people to progress throughout the organization, to a big part of also what's the teamwork, how much do you help other people inside of the team, et cetera, which is becoming crucial and really, really important.
Yeah. And then fast forward to today, what's the team look like today? How many people do you have in each type of role? And then I'd love to dive into kind of how that team works.
Yeah, so it's a very broad question. So if you're looking at my direct team, we have 40 reps and 5 managers. So like 40 reps divided over the 5 different managers. And then if you're looking at across the organization, I believe by heart we're around 173 right now, but still continuously changing, of course. We're growing really quickly and hiring a lot. The diversity there is huge. When I started, it was like most startup companies or companies that just start a sales team, the first person carries the head of everyone. So you're the SDR, the BDR, the customer success agents, everything that you can think about, you're in one role. And that's usually how it goes when you're more in the early positions. And then the more that the company develops, more that you have the luxury to start specializing in each role. So if you're looking at it today, you have SDRs and BDRs. If you say an SDR, it's more focused on incoming leads. If you're talking about BDRs, it's more working with existing companies. Then we have account executives that are focusing more on new business, account managers that are focusing more on existing business, sales engineers that are helping more with the beginning process for the larger deals, dedicated customer success managers that come from the CS side, but that get involved when it's already existing bigger deals. That, by the way, doesn't fall under the sales team. The dedicated success manager falls under the customer success team, which was also a very conscious decision. The way that we kind of looked at it is we really want one person that's only focused on customer satisfaction, retention, and everything related to that. And if there's like topics that can be a bit more tricky to speak about and potentially even can like put some stress on the relationship, of course, we always want to make sure that we also have a very good relationship with any of the customers that we work with. But in the end, if it's a bit of a tougher conversation, especially around commercials, that's our job to have that conversation and to make sure that it doesn't impact any of the relationship with the dedicated success managers. So where you see in a lot of companies, it's kind of a mix between AM and dedicated success into one. We did decide to separate that into 2 different roles, where one is really focused on retention, customer satisfaction, everything like that. And the other is a little bit more focused on how can we grow the account further. On top of that, now it's going to go a little bit more to the customer success side because we really work very closely on all of those sides. One, you have the biz ops team, business operations, and from business operations, a big part of that also falls under the sales org. And then we have all of the supporting roles from the CS side. So You have implementation consultants, which are really focused on the setup of accounts. You have what I mentioned before, the dedicated success managers that work on the bigger accounts and stick to it. We have the customer success that's making sure that we have 24/7 support with the tickets and any questions that come up. We have a CX team that's more focused on like the real technical type of questions. So in short, you see today definitely spread a lot. I would not recommend any startup to start that way because it's not realistic. It's going to be way too expensive for you and it doesn't really make sense. But the bigger that you get, you definitely should go into that direction. So I would say you start very broad where everybody's kind of wearing multiple hats. But the bigger the organization becomes, the more that you start getting that need of specialized positions across the organization, by the way. That's not just in sales, it's in any department.
Yeah. And when you start to think of like that specialization, so you talked about you have outbound and inbound, so SDR and BDRs, you kind of split between inbound, outbound. And then you have obviously your sales team kind of ending up working the folks who those people have talked to. So how are you splitting out people who are maybe already product users, they're already using Monday in some capacity, versus maybe purely outbound? Or have you split reps out, or kind of like what's your territory setup, I guess is what I'm going
Yeah,
after here.
great question. And it's also a little bit more tricky than that. And again, we consistently change things around based on where the scenario is. So it's not so much that SDR is inbound versus BDR outbound. It's more that when we talk about SDR, we really talk about anything that relates to new business. So it can mean inbound customers that come to us that they handle, or it can mean outbound customers that we touch for the first time. And when you're thinking about BDR, it's more connected to account-based marketing. So it can be inbound to lead that we already have a relationship with, or it could be outbound to an organization that we work with, but they never heard from us. An important note to say, this is different in pretty much every organization. So don't think because you heard it here, this is how every company works. Like, especially when you talk about SDR, BDR, like I think almost every company has a different terminology. So that's something to keep in
Yeah, our
mind. And if you
SDR team
start
is
with a new
purely
company,
outbound. So yeah, exactly.
exactly. Yeah, it's different everywhere. So if you start a new job, definitely ask what it means in that company because it is different in a lot of organizations. But that's for us kind of the differentiation. It started more with inbound and outbound, but today it is really more connected to, is it completely new business, whether it's outbound or inbound, or is it existing business, whether it's outbound or inbound? Similar to that, we also split AEs in that level. So we have outbound AEs and inbound AEs. And the reason why that is so important is because it's a very different type of funnel. And again, we're also consistently thinking, how can we further optimize it the bigger you become as an organization? One example of that is that we recently added a new role that allows us to work with the smaller companies that in the past always went to customer success. And the reason why we're able to do that is because we have a new team that exists out of less experienced people, but that actually allows us to dive into a segment that we see that there's a lot of potential. So if we're talking about inbound AEs, it's much more important that they know the process after somebody already showed interest. If you're talking about outbound AEs, that's a much longer process. We had it combined, we had it separate. The big thing that I would say that you want to take in consideration is how does it conflict and can that create a problem? So for example, if you give an inbound AE also extra outbound leads, when I say outbound, it can mean completely cold, but it can also mean a conference that we got certain leads from that heard it there for the first time, but didn't really show interest. That process is completely different. So if you're now sending somebody X number of leads every day and you expect them to chase those from the conference to the same extent as somebody's full pipeline exists out of those opportunities, in general, what you're going to see is like the person that builds those opportunities themselves and that's all they have will be a lot more consistent in following up with the user, making sure that you do absolutely everything to get in contact with them, which is obviously more limited when you're sending that person new leads coming in all the time. So I think that's an important distinction. We started with a mix, and I'm sure that we'll change it around multiple times to find the best possible model. But I personally think one of the better ways to do it, if you have the luxury of having a big enough team, is to really separate it. Again, if you're in the early stages, usually you don't have that luxury to really separate it.
Yeah. And let's break it down to the inbound product users, right? So let's look at that cohort for a little bit. Inside of those users, kind of what types of data is the team looking at? What tools are you using to get access to some of this data to understand who you should be talking to? When should you be talking to them? What's the context? What's that look like for you all today?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, For us, when we're talking about inbound, one of the great things that allows us to get a lot of information immediately is we do have a trial period, which means that it goes beyond just the information that you can get from an enrichment tool about how big is the company, the users, and all of that data. We actually have specific data about how have they been using the trial. So that already allows us to get a lot of information from it. The way that it happens is we start off with kind of the criteria for an MQL, a marketing qualified lead, which moves away the areas that we already know today for our company. It doesn't really make sense for us to have the sales team focus on it, right? So there used to be companies that had less employees than 100, was not something that went to the sales team. We do want to give them amazing service, so it was still handled by the customer success team, but that doesn't really make sense for the sales team to handle that. As I mentioned before, then we brought in an SMB team, and actually now we have the capability to handle anything from 20 users and up. So that went a little bit lower, but still everything below the 20 directly goes to the customer success team. So the first thing that we're looking at is from the MQL, we're saying, okay, from this company size, it becomes relevant. Anything that's below that, we still want them to have a good experience. We still want to make sure that they have access to our customer success team, but it's not what is routed to sales. Then we start looking at that. What are our different segments? So our different segments is we have SMB, mid-market, and enterprise. SMB is standing for small, medium business. Again, terminology that in almost every company is different. In Monday.com, when we say SMB, we talk about companies up to 100 employees, mid-market up to 1,500 employees, and enterprise 1,500 plus. So that's another segment that we're saying, okay, these leads are going to those teams based on the company size. And of course, there's a lot of other things connected to it as well. Which banner did they came from? Some banners mean that there's a higher likelihood of a conversion rate because that's where the type of customers usually go to. Who are the people that actually signed up? And that's where we get a little bit more into product-led growth that really helps us. The moment that they sign up, we immediately know who signed up. We immediately understand what is their title. We can immediately see what is the usage that they meant mostly into. And especially things that you want to think about is what is kind of triggers that tell us that this is likely to be a customer that we're looking for. So for example, if I think about the enterprise segment, if it's a customer that is opening up the contract, right? That's something that already shows us, okay, that is a relevant customer. He opened up the enterprise pricing on the pricing page. It's a huge organization. There's all of these different little triggers that you can kind of get throughout the platform that allows you to understand who is or what type of person is this likely leaning to. If they ask for a white paper, it tends to be a larger organization that comes with a more serious interest, for example. So that's where it starts. And then again, it connects very much on your luxury, right? The more luxury you have in regards to the number of leads, the tighter you can make the system. The less leads you have, the more wider you need to go, because in the end, you want to make sure that your team has enough to work with. So based on the luxury that you have, you want to think about things like work email versus personal email. You want to think about the engagement that the customer had with the platform, the specific type of actions, the titles and the positions that are included in there, which really allows you to funnel further down. And based on that, you're saying, okay, which segment are we directly working with as a sales team? So it's really a combination of what is the information that we know immediately, thinking about segment, what segment is most relevant for Monday, what banner did they come from, how big is the company size, to information that we can quickly get from the platform based on the usage that they actually had.
Got it.
Did it answer the question?
Yeah. And so is your team using, you mentioned MQLs, right? So marketing qualified leads. Is your team
Correct.
using PQLs, product qualified leads today, or is that some terminology that you use internally?
No, really good question. I would say technically yes, because we kind of move it into one algorithm. So it's not so much that we're looking at it separately, we're more looking at it as one model. And I would say like what we're checking on top of the MQL is really the product-led growth, right? Like that's the extra information that we add to it that allows us to say, okay, based on this algorithm, these are the leads that we're saying that we want to focus on. A lot of that information is connected to product-led growth, right? It is what did they use inside of the system? Who do we know that are our strongest customers by everything that we already have in there? What type of actions did they do inside of the product that allows us to see where it comes from? So it's not like we have a separate list with like, these are your MQLs and these are your PQLs. It is more, it comes in from the MQL level where we're saying what actually goes to sales. Then we're adding a lot of the product-led growth data to it that we can already get from the system that allows us to filter even further so that we really focus on where can we make the biggest impact. And that's also when it turns into an SQL when actually the salesperson says, okay, this is now a verified opportunity. So we do look at it, but it is within that same funnel of directly moving to it, and we actually don't go to PQL.
Got it. Okay, makes sense. And I guess if you could sort of paint a picture of what your ideal world would look like. So you have access to all this MQL type data, you have access to this product usage data today. But if you were to paint a picture of like what would be the best way for your reps to be able to respond to this data, like what would be the best way for them to kind of be able to interact and segment out the data? Yeah, I'd be curious what you think.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. Like, first of all, I do think we're in a really good place already, just mainly because we have the luxury of having all of this analytics at our fingertips. I think that step number one is bring the data in front of your team, right? Not in front of leadership, in front of the team, because they're the ones that are actually using it. And luckily, we have all of the data that we just spoke about all in front of them, right? How did they use it? Where did they use it? Obviously connected to personal identifiable information, and we don't look actually what they do on the system itself. But there are those triggers that allows you to know what type of features did people use, things like that, so that it gives us the right information to be able to start utilizing it from there on. So I think that's one of the biggest things. Like, data is something that should be shared across the organization, and the more that you empower your team members with the right data, the more that they can actually utilize it to get great results.
Yeah, I mean, you're in a good spot today, right? The team does have access to the data. Like, that's core is just getting the data in the first place, which I think like that step
sure.
you guys definitely like check the box on. But are there pieces of that you think like what would make it easier for the team to be able to act on that data, or what types of access would be, what would be the best enablement for your team, I guess, if you were to kind of paint a picture of what that might look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think one of the things of becoming like consistently, even though that Monday is still a very friendly and easy to use platform, the more that you develop a tool, the more complex capabilities you can use for it as well, which means that it becomes extremely important to actually keep track of that and making sure that you organize the structure of the org in a way that you're enabled to deem to be most successful. So an example of that could be is what we spoke about earlier. In your team, you want to make sure that you have qualities that add on to each other. I'll give an example, right? We have 4 new products that we released around CRM product, around the marketing product, around the development product. It doesn't help me to have a team of 10 people that all really know the CRM product, but not the other products, right? I want to have people that their strengths are connected to it. By the data that we all have the capability to see, we can actually start taking into consideration how do we want to build a team and what type of people we want to start routing what type of leads to. And I think that's a direction that we're consistently diving deeper into. That's also very much connected to what is the size of your team. Because in the beginning, you can do that. And even later on, when you're a bigger team, it still can be challenging because there's so many different varieties of how you can kind of slice and dice that. And then you also have the consideration, I want all-round people, right? Because in the end, the ability of understanding all the different options is also going to make you a much stronger salesperson. Having that said, what I'm looking at now, for example, is to have an expert on each product at minimum in each team. That doesn't mean that the rest of the team doesn't know what it does, but when you need that expert that really knows to talk to the personas, the use case, the workflows, live the dream that maybe came from that industry before he joined Monday, gives a huge extra value. So I think that's one of the things that I would dive even deeper into. How can we kind of slice and dice it, that we can dive even deeper into making people true experts on whatever the direction is that they are focusing on.
Got it. I'm going to shift gears here a little bit. I'm curious how how sales works together with the product team and getting that product feedback and sort of a two-way street there. Because, if you talk to people more often from the sales side versus talking to people from the product side, I think people have differing ways that they'd like to communicate, that what they think is important to communicate, interest in looking at data sets generally is slightly different across 2 different teams. So I'd be curious how you work together and what you've found for some tips that you'd give others there.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I'll say one thing that I think benefits us is because we came from such a really strong product foundation early on, and because also there was a really good understanding of the benefit of that when we built a sales team, that by itself already creates a really good synergy. But even with that, it's not enough. Like, it's tricky. You are right. We're both speaking different languages. And especially when it comes around prioritization, it's very difficult to really manage that. So the first process around it is really simple. We just have a lot of different type of processes that allows us to take in that feedback. And then the way that we take it in is also on different shapes. So you have everything that we directly get from our customers towards the client-facing tool, let's say Zendesk, right? We get a lot of information from there, which overall is the smaller customers. Then you have the feedback that you directly get from the dedicated success managers and account managers on the bigger customers. We fill out that information connected to what type of companies is it, because that will allow us to actually understand what are the needs for the largest organizations, smaller organizations, and answer that a lot better. But we still have this problem, which I think you have in a lot of organizations. At some point, it becomes who screams the loudest is the person that get the most, not necessarily where it is needed. And I think one of the interesting things that we did there, and a quick shout out to Leah Bouwman, who's managing that, she actually used to be one of our, if not the strongest account manager in the team, but also someone that worked really closely with our product team, which again shows by collaborating well with other departments, like you're setting yourself up for success. Now we came in a really tricky scenario where it was, oh, we don't want to lose one of our stronger salespeople, but at the same time, you also see the insane impact that she actually brought there. We actually have a podcast around it as well on Startup for Startup. But pretty much what happened is she started working already on that capacity herself. It made her really successful, realized that that is something that she's really interested in, and then ended up moving to product sales alignment. So her whole position today is how do I create more alignment between the product team and the sales team? And one of the things that I also learned by just like kind of looking at how she's doing it is really understanding the different way of communication. So from the sales side, it's all around like how much is this going to impact the accounts, how it's going to reduce our bottlenecks, how it's going to allow us to close more deals. Where from the product side, it's a lot more like where's the data? Like we really need to see this around the data, how is it going to impact? And having somebody that understands how to speak most languages and then kind of brings it together when we're really connecting it has been insanely impactful. And she's still in that role today. And we actually already started growing that role. And now she has a team that she works with as well. So super important, great question as well. And like we're really doing everything that we can to build a really strong relationships and collaboration between sales and product. And by the way, also sales and marketing. It's a similar situation where you often see friction, where like in a lot of organizations, like the marketing team might complain about the sales team for not closing the deals, and the sales team is complaining about the marketing team for not bringing the right leads. In the end, a good relationship with us and the marketing team is going to mean we give much better feedback about how they need to approach the customers, which is in the end is going to improve our life. They will be able to manage it much better if we understand what matters. So like, for example, even all the way up to forecasting, the way that we forecast impact the spend of the marketing team. Just making sure that the team has that understanding that you actually impact the strengths of your opportunities by accurately forecasting, which allows us to spend more marketing, focuses on that alignment between the departments. And I think that's the biggest thing from it. Focus on the alignment, where are the connected goals between us, and make those really important KPIs. One example of that is a KPI that we have in Monday, which is MAP, standing for monthly active paying people. That KPI is across the board. It doesn't matter whether you talk about marketing, whether you talk about customer success, whether you talk about sales, we all strive for that goal. Have more people on the account that are actively using it. Improves every single segment. It's going to be easier to upsell if it's people that are heavily using the platform. It means customer success does it well if they get good retention. It means marketing is doing it well because we get more people inside of the funnel. So thinking about what is that North Star that we all work on together is something that really helps with alignment between the organizations. And having that conversation from a place of really being open to understand what are the pain points from the product team if you're in sales, and the other way around, because else you just get into that crazy bubble of screaming at each other, blaming each other, not going to help anyone.
Yeah, this is actually one of my favorite parts around the product-led space, though, is that product-led growth companies have this almost forcing function that makes all of the teams have to be aligned, because if you're not, it just doesn't work. Like, because the fact of the matter is that, you know, you're talking to people across their customer life cycle, where it used to be in sort of some traditional orgs, okay, marketing did this and then we pass it over to sales. So then there's this easy kind of blame game between the two. And then sales did it, pass it over to CS, which makes an easy blame game there. But now it's like, well, you were aware the data was available to everybody the whole time. And what you're talking about, with MOP and having everyone aligned to the same metrics, obviously, helps with that alignment too. As we're wrapping up here though, what piece of advice would you give to product-led companies who are just getting started? They're in the early days. What would you say to them?
Oof, great question. I mean, it really, a big part of it is where the company starts, right? Like if it's a company that is only looking at product-led growth, it's, I think, seriously consider on what is the extra value that you can have as a sales team on top of it. And the same thing the other way around. If it's a company that only focuses on sales, you really want to consider product-led growth because it's such an amazing way of expanding throughout accounts, showing like the value that people are getting and having kind of a mix between a bottom-up and a top-down approach. So I think depending on where you start, think how you can create that synergy to have a good combination of the two. I think a big part of it is start thinking about what type of data and analytics do you want to do to help you make decisions. That's a really big aspect of it. And I would say, took that to the extreme. An example of that is we even had a robot that we compared against existing salespeople to understand where do we make the biggest impact. And I think that comes from a really product-led growth mindset. Because in the end, if you're really in that sales mindset, like you're going to come more from a place of like, oh my God, like this might mean that I lose my job. If you're coming from the product-led growth mindset, this is actually going to allow me to do so much more in the place where I really add value and utilize the product to help where I am not needed to that extent. I can say, like, I've been seeing this for a while. If you do it the right way, your sales team is never going to be indispensable. It is just you're going to kind of adjust where they put the majority of their focus to make them more successful and the company more successful. So I think that's probably the biggest one for a starting startup, to really focus on that and making sure that you use that synergy.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It's like a forward-thinking way of, all these companies and so many folks who are now hearing about product-led growth and trying to find the combination of sales and product-led growth. And, I think now the market's sort of realizing and shifting towards it's not one or the other, it's this combination of the two, but understanding where are my strengths, what can we automate? And that way we can just kind of build on top of what we have. So yeah, that's great advice. Where should people go to learn more about you and to learn more about Monday.com?
Okay, so first of all, obviously happy to connect with anybody on LinkedIn. That's going to be a little bit of a tricky one because my last name is Vuijsje, Vuijsje, J from Jonathan. And of course, also feel free to reach out to me over email. That's an easier one, Aaron@monday.com.
Awesome. Well, Aron, thanks again. I really appreciate you spending some time with us today, and it was great to have you on Product-Led Revenue.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for inviting me and having the chance to have an amazing conversation.
Awesome. Have a good one.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Product-Led Revenue. This show is brought to you by Correlated, the first platform built for product-led revenue. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow the Product-Led Revenue podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit getcorrelated.com/podcast to get access to all of the latest episodes.